This video is brought to you by Eiji, a character a majority of the audience has no clue why he's helping Kirito due to not knowing about cordial chords. We had a packed episode this week, and this opening sequence is getting old after repeating it for multiple weeks now. An absolute incredible episode as well as a divisive one. I have to say, I never thought an episode would both be my favorite and my second least favorite. But so is the nature of anime original editions. They are a big gamble, and this one both paid off and backfired at the same time. And it is my job to explain. Welcome everyone, it's me Gamerturk, your best source of Art Online information, and this is Alicization Explained featuring War of Underworld episode 17, The Demon Child aka Prince of Hell, because Aniplex USA can't stand subtlety. Short overview, we have completed Art Online Volume 17, Alicization Awakening, and moved over to the first couple pages of Volume 18, Alicization Lasting. Well, kinda, because things got quite muddled with Eiji and Yuna's anime original edition, changing up the scenes a bit. I would say we adapted around 25 to 30 pages from the books, but half of the content was cut or changed, whereas just as much was added as anime original content. The biggest axe this week hit Po's chest harder than another event in the near future, as his backstory was completely butchered, but at the same time, Eiji and Yuna got glorious and beautiful scenes this week that divided the fan base quite a lot on certain topics, which causes me to get torn in the middle too. It's almost a perfect addition, fitting in with the established technology and events perfectly, like Eiji growing up from his NFC condition, or Yuna logging in from the SAO server, but also incredibly stupid things like Eiji being able to hold his own for so long against Po himself, Yuna logging out when Eiji dies instead of helping those inside like Yuna actually would, etc. Both sides have legitimate praises and complaints, whereas I'm here to take what works and look at what doesn't and explain all the intricacies to you. But beforehand, most certainly your first question is, how is Yuna alive and why is Eiji helping Kirito? And the answer to that is in Art Online Cordial Chords. Feel free to stop this video right now and check out my summary video on that first in the description, as I won't be reiterating things I said in that video over here in this video. But if you're new to my Explain series, what I do here is essentially provide you all the vital information on characters, events, action, lore from the source material, light novels, things that the anime did not convey properly or just did not have the time to, so you can still see the full picture. If you want to jump to specific events, timestamps will be in the description along with Amazon and Book Depository affiliate links, so you can grab the light novels for yourselves. Also, Medina, Kirito and Eugeo merch may just be what you're looking for, illustrated by the amazing Jen K. It is available on my Teespring page. With that, let's cast away the sly foxes spreading misinformation and get on with Alicization Explained. Okay, that was a very long intro, and this is gonna be a very long video too. So much cut out, so much changed, and so much anime original content to solidify within the narrative by explaining all the key aspects within the confines of the world. So buckle up. I strongly recommend using the timestamps in the description, as the structure of the video will be a little bit more free-flowing than usual too, with all the detail we're gonna talk about today. First, let's start by addressing the biggest concern of the line novel readers as well as anime-only people who want to learn how this massive change will affect the future of the narrative. Without any spoilers, I want to say, but we have received the early trailer for the next episode earlier today, by talking about how Eiji and Yuna scene was injected into the story. For starters, we got 4 separate scenes at this point in the story, 5 if you count the classroom, but that's irrelevant for the scope of this point. We got Higa and Yanai over on Ocean Turtle, which is barely getting any attention. We got the perspective following Subtilizer, currently featuring Sinon vs Subti. We got the camera following Leafa, and we got our main scene over at the ruins area with Wasago, Kirito, Asuna, Klein and others. As you can imagine, the Eiji edition has absolutely no relevance on any of the other scenes to begin with, only being injected into the ruins area scene. But what matters is how he is injected. You see, the flow of that scene is as follows, including previous episodes in the novels. Po arrives, Asuna feels at a loss, Kirito is brought up and Po tortures the vegetable, Klein stands up in rage, only to get impaled once. He still continues to get back up despite actively being held down by a red knight and starts moving forward, but gets impaled with a second sword, which crushes Asuna even further emotionally. Klein still doesn't give up, forcing himself to stand up, at which point Po comes on top of him to have a chat with him and order his execution, which is followed by another unexpected event, followed by a tearjerker moment in the vaguest terms possible to avoid further spoilers, despite the fact that we got the next episode trailer, special trailer. Along with that, we also get Wasago's backstory around there, which was pulled forward a lot as well, as was butchered by the anime, but that doesn't change much in what you need to know in regards to the timeline, as that was quite the isolated chapter on its own in the books, not affecting the ruins area narrative thread of what's actually happening on the ground. Now, considering that timeline on your screen, even if you're an anime only, you can see exactly what's been made with the narrative, as nothing beyond a certain point was adapted at all. We had everything up until Po deciding to execute Klein because he was making too much noise, yet nothing beyond that point. Thus, it is very clear that the content around the ruins area happening was not cut from the anime, but rather split, into which Eiji and Yuna were injected without changing anything at all, which is very clear in today's trailer as well. To put it simply, I do not have any reason to downplay such an amazing addition from a narrative standpoint, or at the very least I will reserve my judgment on that until we see what happens with the events in the next episode. There's still one major event, and whether they adapt that or drop it will shape my personal opinion on this, but from the looks of the trailer, we're definitely getting it, there's no way around it. But with the episode narrative clarified, let's go back to going step by step from the beginning of the episode. We start with Yui noticing the connection from the SAO server under Kamura's / Rect's control, there's some legal shenanigans there in the background, hosting the diva Yuna inside, establishing a connection to the Underworld server through the open port. We know this is very much possible because Yuna does have the authority to establish connections from the inside of the SAO server. We have seen this both in Ordinal Scale as well as in Cordial Chords. Ronye trying to protect Kirito and then so easily swept aside by Po was funny. I love Po's voice actor and antics too, as well as his sexy ass soundtrack really fits well together. To add, they set up their future shot perfectly here by getting the Blue Rose sword get stuck in the ground, only to come back to it in about 15 minutes, as if the following scenes until then were just injected in there in an unnatural manner. Well, why am I even going for cheeky references? We'll get there in a second. As mentioned earlier, the last we get in this continuity is Klein rising up in absolute rage and fury, only to get impaled back to the ground, and this is where we diverge, or rather push back the actual events in the books to make space for anime original scenes, because this was the moment Klein just kept pushing on despite getting impaled, at which point Po had to come, speak to him and order his execution. And the execution order was the catalyst for the actual meat of the scene, with two major events happening, both of which I will not spoil. So instead of Klein making his second push, which I assume we will see next week to keep things going without a change, Po directly goes for Kirito, which is weird on its own because his goal is not to kill Kirito but to force him to wake up and then torture him by killing everyone else in front of his eyes. This video is getting demonetized. Eiji jumps in to save him, and goddamn what a save it is. Before we get into the nitty gritty, this is an amazing anime original scene on its own, with beautiful animation and great callbacks to all Hopeful Chant, Ordinal Scale and Cordial Chords, and simply put, I'm very happy about this edition, despite it overall amounting to jack shit in its significance, as Eiji and Yuna go away as quickly as they came, which was expected from an anime original scene at this point in the story. They could do nothing that could change the plot after all, but now let's get into the details and talk about the portions of the scene that are great and fit perfectly well within the rules of the universe, and portions that are not as good, where they didn't even bother tying in or explaining properly. Some more stuff has been elaborated on by Reki himself on Twitter, which was one of the reasons I took a bit longer for this video, waiting for his tweets and so on. So let's go. The first question some of you may have is, why is Eiji protecting Kirito? The answer is, watch my Cordial Chords video, they worked together after the events of Ordinal Scale. His fighting style is obviously a massive reference to his highly athletic nature in Ordinal Scale. The problem with the entire sequence is that the anime cornered itself into an unsolvable problem here. They have to make Eiji look cool, however, that means he needs to be able to stand his own against a legend like Po, someone who consistently outplayed Kirito and Asuna throughout almost the entire 2 years of Aincrad. And, well, you may say, oh, but Eugeo was very cool and still got wrecked in the end. Sure, but that doesn't matter. Eugeo was able to stand his own ground for a dozen minutes, you know? Scenes like him losing his arms and going for the bite, that stuff is incredibly well done because they showcase the character getting absolutely bodied, yet continuing a desperate fight. That's the only way to respect both sides of the equation. I love that one specifically. However, the fact that he continuously manages to clash swords against Po even before Yuna buffed him, I'm sorry, but Eiji simply is not on that level. Moving on chronologically, because I don't want to accidentally skip something I need to explain, here we see Po influencing the other players. The way anime did it, it sure did look like mind control, which it never was, so I'm baffled by them portraying it as such. It was simply the result of Po constantly planting the seeds of a quote-unquote final massacre in his guidance since both factions appeared, a major skepticism towards the existence of traitors among the crowd to ensure the non-violent portion of the mob, if it comes to that, would be seen as a traitor instead of the voice of reason. And in the end, he was able to put the Chinese and the Korean into infighting to make sure as many people as possible would suffer, just like he had done back in Aincrad. At the very least, that was what quite clearly had happened back in the novels, but according to the episode commentary by Reki earlier today, he was quite insistent on this actually being incarnation. Still not mind control. It's not a change I like at all per se, simply because I already dislike incarnation in War of Underworld, but nevertheless it has precedence in the series. Proper incarnation is impossible to achieve using traditional full dive devices like nerve gear and atmosphere, and due to having a limited connection, you can only use incarnation on people using these devices. You can't use incarnation by using the device. However, while limited, there are in fact things you can achieve. The clearest example exists in Fairy Dance Arc. Nobuyuki Sugo's experiment was basically affecting the emotions of people who had been taken prisoner during the logout phase of Aincrad, people who were using traditional nerve gears. And he was succeeding at his experiment, or at least making quite the progress. That alone is the proof that it is possible to affect the emotions of people using nerve gear or atmosphere with the limited connection that is available, as long as you are using a device that is capable of conjuring that incarnation to affect other people. And since Po is diving with an STL, the explanation is, technically speaking, very much possible. Doesn't mean that I personally like the explanation though, I prefer the implication made in the novels. Of course, these scenes along with Po flashbacks were pulled earlier a bit and sprinkled around Eiji's sequence rather than occupying a single block on their own a little later in the narrative. It's not a bad choice per se, but we'll talk about Po's absolutely butchered backstory in a bit once we're done with Eiji and Yuna. Speaking of her entrance was glorious and was actually tied in well in regards to her effects on both Eiji and the enemy soldiers. And if you don't know how she is alive, this is your umpteenth cue to learn more about Cordial Chords, which is a story about Eiji and Kirito working together to save Yuna, who is hosted on the old SAO server, now controlled by Komura/Rect, through some legal stuff happening in the background that I'm not gonna go into. Entering by tying herself to the SAO account of Shigemura Yuna inside the SAO server, she was able to convert herself into Underworld, unlike Yui, who did not have a player account to log in as. With her appearance, calming down the Chinese and Korean players was great, except it was played like it was yet another spell, which it isn't. After all, Yuna is a worldwide sensation and a lot of people, especially VRMMORPG players, full well know about the Japanese AI idol. And her coming into the server is obviously a massive sign to cause more people to doubt the story of the Japanese players being the invaders. Diva Yuna, while the original has her own conscience now to a certain extent as a result of Cordial Chords, is still an official worldwide phenomenon that everyone knows coming from Japan. Thus, her appearance does give a lot more credibility to the fact that this may indeed be a Japanese server. As for her skill to buff Eiji, Reki's tweet spam earlier today, yesterday, the day before yesterday, depending on when this video goes live, confirmed that she has somehow used the ability of her OS NPC self, not even the extra skill chant from SAO, both of which technically should not be possible if we assume normal circumstances. Previous events clearly state that gameplay mechanics do not come along when you convert, only items, most of which are converted to their in-universe equivalents in Underworld, mostly retaining their original abilities. But keep that mention of items in your mind. Pedram over on SAO Wikia had a theory regarding this, and I feel like it's worth mentioning here for your consideration, as even Reki himself refused to explain how Yuna first appeared as a Pixie, then turned into the Diva avatar, before turning into her SAO account, despite quote-unquote using her SAO account throughout. I mean, Reki said he had a theory, but it would be too much to explain in the tweet chain, so all I can do at this point is to try to provide a logic as to all the stuff happening here. I would like to stress that this was the closest we got to explaining all these in a logical manner over on Wikia, with multiple people contributing. So while I can attest that the theory is solid, by no means is this the canon until we get an official confirmation. It's merely an attempt at showcasing that it can logically and realistically happen. We go step by step because it does get a little complicated and technical, and I'll try to make it as little confusing as possible. For starters, let's go over what Yuna is. Looking back at Alo scenes as well as this episode, she was considered a navigation pixie in Alo, same as Yui. Yui was provided the classification because she was an AI module stored in Kirito's inventory. By that logic, we can now assume Eiji has grabbed Yuna into its atmosphere after the events of Cordial Chords, and when logging into Alo, with AI Yuna in his inventory of course, she popped back up as a navigation pixie as his item. The fact that she's considered an item is the key factor here, as a similar adjustment was made to feature another character as an anime original edition earlier. Pina in the novels never made it into Project Alicization, however in the anime she was converted into Underworld as a player item belonging to Shilika. Same concept applied to Yuna, her pixie form was simply converted in as an item belonging to Eiji into Underworld, and that is why she first appeared as a pixie. Second step was turning into the Diva Yuna appearance from Ordinal Scale. That is quite simple in comparison. Same as Yui being able to change between her pixie form and human form, Pixie Yuna can just switch between her pixie and human forms too, so she turns to her original self, the Ordinal Scale Diva self. Third step is when she assumes the SAO avatar Yuna outlook, which is equally simple, simply using the SAO Yuna data she brought over when logging in to overwrite her looks. The only bit that is the cause of serious debate was her logging out when Eiji died, and again, thanks to Pedram, we arrived at a logical and very technical conclusion. You see, Yuna entered the world as an item attached to Eiji. Sure, she did bring over the Yuna SAO avatar from SAO Server, but her connection into Underworld, all the background stuff with the connection handshake etc. were done using Eiji's. She did not have a unique connection into the Underworld at that very moment herself. Hence why the moment Eiji's connection was dropped from Underworld, so was Yuna's, despite at that point she being there with her own SAO converted account. Basically, it's caused by how the decades-old internet infrastructure as we know it works, rather than how any of these super techie sci-fi stuff work. I know some of you have questions about what happened to the dying people as well, but you're gonna have to wait for the epilogue chapters of the anime to get information on that. If I say something right now, it's gonna be spoilers. One key detail that a lot of people will most likely not even realize or think about because it comes from Cordial Chords is that Eiji's SAO avatar does not have the Floor 100 sword, which means, being the gamer that he is, Kirito actually requested the sword back from Eiji, despite he full well knew he probably would never dive back into the SAO server. God damn it, Kirito, if you let Eiji keep the damn sword, he would have destroyed Po right then and there, so add Eiji's defeat to the long line of painful memories that your decisions caused over the years. Eiji's clashes with Po triggering his backstory is, as I said, a neat addition, regardless of his backstory being butchered again. Once the Eiji segment is over, I'll go over the butchered backstory too. Eiji losing his hands is fucking brutal, but no longer succumbing to his NFC and going for that bite, it's even more brutal. See, that's the stuff I love. That totally worked perfectly fine, because that shows Eiji getting massacred because he's not on the same level as Po, yet still fighting valiantly without giving up, continuing to overcome his NFC and actually catching Po off guard by doing something he never expected, much like those rare times Kirito managed to outplay him. His encounter with Po on Floor 5 town Karluin comes into mind, where he has to do something the poster does not expect to break free of his sinister clutches. I find it funny that Eiji's final words are, "Did I do what I needed to do?" And I'm like, what the fuck did you need to do, Ekun? Because from what I have seen, all you have done is get buddied by the poster. So it seems like you already entered with the bar set pretty damn low as it is. But with that, Eiji is gone and we can have a look back at Po's backstory, or rather the lack thereof. The anime has butchered the entire backstory of Po. The family portion, I have no issues, it's passable, it gets the point across. But shoplifting a nerve gear unit before they're collected by the authorities, then randomly logging in from his home, that's impossible. Literally, you are not able to log into Sword Art Online after launch, except for very special circumstances. At that point, everybody was moved over to the hospitals and the connections to the game were basically locked in, not allowing any new connections. The connection addresses were distributed for good, never to be changed again. So at that point, the only way to log in after launch is to use a connection that was already allowed to have a connection. Simply put, using the device and connection of someone who had died to create a new account. But how did he even get there? You see, to accept the kidney donation, Wasago had one requirement. He wanted to live in Japan, start over in a new country. So in exchange for his kidney, his father arranged him a passport and documents to get into Japan, but due to the way the adoption law was set up in Japan, etc., upon arrival he could not stay in the country through legal means and ended up in a Korean crime syndicate in Japan. That was when he heard about SAO, along with a job to kill someone who had been stuck in the game. He was presented the job with no option to refuse. He had to make sure the person would not survive the death game for sure, and the kill should not be able to track back to him in the case the game keeps the logs of player actions towards other players. But logging in was not easy either, at least if it was a simple personal request like the anime portrayed it. The crime syndicate had ensured all the necessary requirements, a nerve gear unit with the software ready, along with a valid IP address to log in with. And of course, once he had logged in, he did not appear in the town of beginnings with his full-on laughing coffin gear and cloak. He appeared with a starter armor instead, only to earn his equipment and fame later. He would go on to kill his target through indirect means while forming Laughing Coffin to be the biggest threat Aincrad would ever see in order to spread chaos and kill as many people as possible. And once he got bored of the group that saw him as a role model imitating his every act, he set up the Laughing Coffin subjugation effort by leaking their hideout to the clearers. He also wanted to personally engage and kill the Black Swordsman and the Flash. However, the subjugation attempt did not create a good enough opportunity to do so. He continued his efforts from the shadows, such as hiring the likes of Kuradil with no success, and shortly after, the game was cleared, causing him to wake up in the real world with a sense of emptiness. To search for a similar excitement, he returned to the US after murdering the crime boss that did not pay him his promised loot, and with the money he stole from the crime syndicate, he moved over to the US. He participated in VR trainings against the likes of the National Guard and the Marines. With his extensive experience in SAO, he shone brightly and was appointed as an instructor. However, the stable life he received was not fulfilling for him. Nothing could compare to the excitement he felt in SAO. Nothing until he found himself in Underworld. And as if it was some twisted fate guiding him, here he was standing, instigating multiple armies to fight each other with his prized prey, the Flash and the Black Swordsman, subdued in front of him. But he still did not feel satisfied. The Kirito he knew was nowhere in sight, a husk of himself. He would not be satiated before he made them properly wake up and torture them by killing those he cared about in front of his eyes. And if Google speech recognition is actually recognizing my speech, this video is definitely getting demonetized. but with Wasago back to his senses and heading towards taking out Klein and the traitor and to instigate more trouble, Asuna herself needed a gentle push of her past to be able to stand one last time. But yeah, with those extensive portions over, the rest of the Explained can actually return to its usual pacing. Naturally, with these changes, the "is this actually a Japanese server" is achieved by Yuna's appearance quite nicely, and in addition to that, Moonface recognizes the Laughing Coffin logo, which is very likely to be quite infamous even abroad thanks to the full records of the SAO incident book published shortly before the events of Ordinal Scale. Again, one of those anime original editions that do make sense within the universe. And again, PoH going on to not mind control, but amplify the negative emotions within people via incarnation. It does have precedence in the series with Sugo's experiments in Fairy Dance, so as much as I do not like it compared to the devilish manipulator PoH was in the novels, it is grounded in terms of what is possible in this universe. On to Sinon and Leafa scenes. We're gonna start becoming faster here because this is already way too long. This was one of the instances where I really enjoyed the frantic nature of their cuts, and I do believe it flows nicely as well. Rather than focusing on the narrative of an individual, the anime focuses on the combined shared emotions between these scenes that makes the cuts work without being too jarring in a sense, so a good call to keep as it is in my opinion. However, there are things for me to mention and clarify here and there throughout these cuts. First off, Sinon did bring over her Hecate via incarnation, but what got my attention was the fact that she also brought over the UI elements from Eugeo, which got a chuckle out of me. She just brought over the gun to her side, not the entire Eugeo codebase after all, but I'm quite sure the only reason this was brought over was to highlight Sinon having no bullets left, so I can cut some slack here. Good intentions at the very least to help the viewer collect information during these quick cuts by visual cues and means. But in fact, this battle was quite watered down, most certainly for the ease of animation. The brutality, not touched, it was kept intact, which I really appreciate, but you need to imagine this fight to be a lot more dynamic, with Gabe and Sinon constantly circling around each other as they fly, as well as Sinon constantly having to fight the recoil of her bolt action Hecate to stabilize herself in between shots. Speaking of in between shots, I mentioned this last week too as a hint, but Subtilizer has a semi-auto rifle right there, which can easily outshoot Sinon at every corner, but during the entire encounter, he's basically toying with her, purposefully shooting at the rhythm Sinon is shooting at, purposefully aiming or rather incarnating his bullets to deflect hers, which is an impossible feat to do on purpose back to back on Eugeo, waiting for Sinon to run out of bullets first, to smile at her face through the scope with his cold smile and finish her with the remaining 2 bullets. See, he really planned this through properly. The necklace, again, I see some people interpreting this as Kirito protecting Sinon. It is not. Kirito is not in a condition to protect himself in the first place. This is Sinon's belief in what she has learned through the death gun incident with Kirito. It's her own belief protecting her, the same as last week's episode. And at the end, I believe the anime did a great job clarifying it, but it doesn't hurt to emphasize myself because these scenes go by a little too fast and it's easy to miss out on key details. The bullet she shoots after running out of bullets is not from Hecate or any sort of incarnation really. At that point, Sinon remembers that while she has summoned her Hecate over the Annihilation Bow, the bow itself still exists underneath the incarnate skin and thus has been charging up spatial resources through its passive ability for a very long time. And that is what she fires through the Battle of Hecate, a full blast of the Annihilation Bow that was charging up since the last time she used it a long time ago, which turns Subtilizer into Lord Zuko. I really love that burn effect. You can even see the burning effect continuing on the edges of the burn mark there. Such cool attention to detail, I like those stuff. Moving on to the Leafa half of the sequence, there are also things to mention. Again, her scenes in War of Underworld I loved since I read the novel. She was the one who drew the shortest end of the stick, went through endless torture yet kept pushing forward, so much so there were murmurs among the Red Knights facing her that she was quote-unquote such a boss in English, plain English, which is something the anime has omitted. I do have a nitpick about when she used the Incarnate Vorpal Strike. That's a bit where the anime tried to overplay the sister of the Black Swordsman a bit too much in my opinion, showing her using the same iconic skill as Kirito, which is logically unsound, let's say, for multiple reasons. First off, Vorpal Strike itself, it is an iconic skill for Kirito, and no matter how much Leafa looks up to him in this instance, she simply does not have the bond with Vorpal Strike that Kirito has. If anything, knowing what Vorpal Strike is, a simple single hit lunge skill at its core, she should know better to go with an AoE skill instead of Vorpal Strike, and that familiarity aspect brings me to the incarnate portion of the Vorpal Strike, the gigantic purple extension. You see, Leafa has no way of reproducing such a version of the skill, as she never saw Kirito use it that way, let alone does she not have the reasons to enhance her Vorpal Strike the way that Kirito possessed at the very specific moment when he did it. Back when Kirito was fighting the one and only Chudel King, there was only one reason that caused his Vorpal Strike to go incarnate. The distance between him and Chudelkin was much longer than what the base Vorpal Strike was capable of traversing, so his mind was solely focused on making up that additional distance, leading into his Vorpal Strike extending by that much. Here, Leafa is fighting an enemy army that is spread very wide, with a thrust/lunge skill with a very narrow span in the first place. I'm not saying it's not possible, it very much is, but I just think it was too much of a stretch given the circumstances to overplay the sibling bond. But goddamn, I was scared that the spear would be axed, considering some of the most brutal showcases of the war getting cut, like the Asuna scene a couple episodes ago. They kept it in and did not censor it either. Absolute mad lads. That was done so greatly as well. Definitely reminded me of Pito getting shot by Shirley in Eugeo, but much more brutal all around. And what follows next, the completely deranged chuckle by Leafa, it just wins the entire sequence for me completely. There's one place they changed an entire scene to censor brutality though, which is back in the real world. The tool that Rinko dropped actually fell right on Yanai's head, piercing his skull and killing him right then and there, rather than him ambiguously dropping down the abyss. So that's kinda sad, the guy needed a more satisfying kill. But hey, they finally included one of Higa's action movie references. As mentioned in earlier videos, Higa was constantly imagining he was living a Mission Impossible-like scenario here and landing a date with the girl at the end. He just thought that would have been a massive death flag for him. And here comes something I and possibly many other light novel readers did not realize at first reading. Higa feels like he sees double for a second, nonchalantly blaming his blood loss for it, but upon second reading, the text makes it very clear that it's not his entire vision going blurry, but rather the text on the screen he's looking at, a hint at the fourth soul that is trying to make him aware that he's trying to connect along. As we approach the very end, obviously the real body's glowing is there for you as the viewer, symbolic rather than literal. Their bodies don't produce phosphorus or anything as a side effect in the real world. But as I said, they made sure to plant the broken Bluro sword there when Wasago threw it away at the beginning of the episode, with Eugeo walking towards him too, leading into Kirito suddenly waking up in his classroom, seemingly sometime way after the school has ended. As we have expected since last week, we start the nightmare sequence with the iconic classroom cliffhanger of the books, officially wrapping up Volume 17 Alicization Awakening, and what awaits us on the other side is memories, with a proper entrance into Volume 18 Alicization Lasting. Since this was already a very long explained, let's end it right here. Weekly Alicization Q&A is back, at least it was back once so far. Hopefully it'll be back again sometime soon if my daily schedule allows it. Anyways, if you have questions that you feel like were not answered in the explained episodes, which this week may be one of those cases, there was just so much stuff to put in there that I probably glossed over some stuff. So if you're interested, do ask them below in the comments for me to answer with hashtag AskGamerturk. Don't worry, I am saving up the interesting questions from previous weeks as well to make sure I don't skip over them despite me skipping the weekly Q&A portion. I will go back to the questions that are interesting even if I skip it this week too. If your question is regarding the future, please add a spoiler warning and give it a couple blank lines to push the spoilers away. And no, I will not answer spoiler questions for the sake of spoilers, like is Kirito gonna die? If you're that curious for spoilers, just read the books. Amazon and Book Depository links are in the description. But if you made it this far, hit that like button and subscribe, and hit the bell icon too while you're at it, and comment highway to hell down below to let me know. Follow me on Facebook and Twitter for the fastest news possible. Lens Squad merch is still around, but now we got Medina, Kirito and Eugeo merch too, so do check it out. A huge thanks to all my patrons and channel members as always, and until next time, stay cool.